If you're tired of endlessly browsing for something good to watch on Netflix or Prime Video, Tubi has the biggest selection of the best movies, and they are 100% free. The only drawbacks with Tubi are the ad breaks, which fortunately are shorter and more sparse than commercials used to be on cable TV. I don't know how many of you remember cable, but it used to cost a lot more than Netflix and way more than free, and was packed with commercials. You don't even have to create an account to start watching movies on Tubi. This video is sponsored by EveryPlate, but I'll tell you about them later in the video. Right now, let's take a look at Tubi's recently added section, which has big blockbusters like the entire Back to the Future trilogy, which I'm telling you, if it's been a while since you've seen this trilogy, it holds up insanely well. They've also got the entire Hunger Games trilogy and the entire Blade trilogy. I love the first Blade and love the second one even more, so all of those are well worth watching on Tubi. Before moving on to those lesser known movies, there's some other big blockbusters that I cannot believe are free on Tubi, movies like E.T. Not only does this hold up really well, but it's one of the best movies of its kind still to this date, and this is the original version. Yeah, it's remastered, it looks great, but the guns aren't all replaced with walkie-talkies. And all the other shenanigans Spielberg did to this movie, you get the real deal right here on Tubi, which is super cool. Another cool and underrated movie is Predators. I know a lot of people didn't really like this one. They felt like Adrian Brody was not a good fit. I thought he killed it. You've got Walton Goggins in this, Lawrence Fishburne, Danny Trejo's got a little role. I mean, it's got a really killer cast and some cool moments. Obviously not as good as the original, but a nice homage to the original at least.
They look thirsty! Well, let's give them something to drink!
And they've also got 300, a movie that would easily be in the Netflix top 10 if it were on Netflix. It's not, it's free on Tubi. For some somewhat recent releases, they just added Red Sparrow. I know this has a few years on it now, but it is a pretty excellent espionage movie with Jennifer Lawrence. It's not as good as some of her other stuff, but if you like spy movies, this one's got some great moments in it, and it feels fairly realistic. Another movie that feels really realistic is Judas and the Black Messiah. This is one that has been over on HBO Max because it was a Warner Brothers thing and they released it there during the pandemic. I often find movies from this particular time period to be a little bit dry, especially when they're telling true stories like this one. And Judas and the Black Messiah is a serious movie, but it has kind of a funky vibe, not just with a killer soundtrack, but the camera work, and it is a really cool movie for one of this kind, meaning it's just got a lot more style than these movies typically have. They've also got Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 in their recently added section. Keep in mind, we're only reviewing movies from their recently added section. They have a lot more on the platform, including Jackie Brown and QT8, the first 8, which is a documentary about the first 8 films of Quentin Tarantino. So if you're a fan of his, they've got quite a bit for you. If you're a Schwarzenegger fan, they've got one of my personal favorites, True Lies. Now, I love movies like Terminator and Predator more, but True Lies is an epic action movie that I think people have really forgotten about, or at least forgotten how cool this movie actually is. And especially with Jamie Lee Curtis's sort of resurgence after Everything Everywhere All at Once, be cool to watch her in this one. Not only is she really kind of fun and do a great character, but that striptease she does is just an absolute knockout. And then it's James Cameron. Some of the action he captured on this movie is, yes, it's goofy, it's silly, but that's kind of what I love about it. And every stitch of it looks absolutely amazing, especially for a movie to come out of the 90s. This thing looks like it just came out recently. Something that did come out somewhat recently is Brightburn. This was actually produced by James Gunn and is very much his idea and is basically an evil Superman. And what's cool about Brightburn is it is very on the nose. That's not usually a compliment for a movie, but it is directly an evil Superman, yet it has nothing to do with DC Comics. I was actually really surprised that DC gave James Gunn the permission to do this. I mean, they're a little looser with their intellectual property than Disney is with all the Marvel stuff, and it pays off with a really cool flick like this. Now, this is for people who like horror movies. It's a little gory at times and a little scary, but it's also just a really cool concept that's brought to life in a really fantastic way. There are plenty more movies to recommend on this list, but I like to recommend more than just movies, like today's sponsor, EveryPlate. Over the past several months, I have been saving a lot of money by cooking EveryPlate meals instead of ordering takeout, and I'm still getting delicious restaurant quality meals. EveryPlate is a meal subscription service that actually allows you to pick from 25 different meals that rotate out every single week, so you'll never get bored. And then they deliver all of the food directly to your door in the exact amount you need, which means I don't need to do any grocery shopping, and I'm saving money because I'm not over buying ingredients. Again, I'm getting the exact amount needed for each recipe. And the recipes are super easy to make. They usually come with just about 6 different steps that are really easy to follow, whether you have cooking experience or not. Most recently, I made a fried chicken sandwich, which I've never done before, and it's easily one of the best fried chicken sandwiches I've ever had. It had this amazing sauce on it that was so easy to make, and jalapenos that were soaked in lime juice, which again, I've never done, and I'll definitely be doing that again. And for lunch, just before recording this video, I made these amazing flautas with pork that were just as delicious as anything I've had from a Mexican restaurant, and it's way cheaper than even food at a Mexican restaurant, which is what I love about EveryPlate. In fact, if you go to my link in the video description below and use my code FLICK149, you're gonna pay just $1.49 per meal with your first EveryPlate order. And I can't stress how simple a lot of these recipes are. They typically only take about 30 minutes, and there's been several things I've cooked from EveryPlate that I've then gone and made with just basic ingredients I've had around the house. So again, go to that link in the description, use my code FLICK149, and you're gonna pay less than $1.50 per meal with your first EveryPlate order. It's a great deal, but speaking of great stuff, let's talk about the rest of the movies included with Tubi right now. A fantasy movie that was somewhat recently released is The Green Knight, directed by David Lowery. I love his movies, and while The Green Knight ultimately isn't really one of my favorites of his, it does have some fantastic scenes. I'm actually really partial to one of the opening scenes in King Arthur's court, and then you get these incredible fantasy visuals all the way through. This one is a slow-paced art film, but if you typically like those, The Green Knight is an excellent pick. And then if you just want something you could watch with the family, Real Steel is a really fun, family-friendly movie starring Hugh Jackman. It's basically a remake of Over the Top, which was a 1980s Sylvester Stallone movie about an arm wrestling competition, except here you get fighting robots, and again, it's really fun, especially if you got slightly older kids. This one is rated PG-13, but it's pretty accessible for the family. For further proof that someone at Tubi knows movies and knows how to pick them, they've got John Carpenter's cult classic, They Live. If you've never seen this, but you like cult movies from the 80s, this is one of the all-time greats. Rowdy Roddy Piper is actually amazing in this movie. He really does make the movie work. And in this movie, he discovers these special sunglasses that allow him to see the world as it actually is. And the way the world actually is ruled by these sort of overlord aliens. The metaphor here, again, is on the nose, but in the coolest way possible, giving this movie some really fantastic moments like this one.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
For some more 80s cheese, and I mean like premium, stinky 80s cheese, Tango and Cash is a super cool flick. You've got Stallone again and Kurt Russell, and what is kind of like an amalgamation of all the action movies from the 80s. There is not a serious moment in this movie, and it is a blast to watch because of that. If you like buddy cop movies, this is kind of the ultimate one. Not meaning it's the best, but if you like that cheesy 80s stuff, Tango and Cash just has it in droves, and it's kind of in its purest form. For Bill Murray fans, a personal favorite of mine is What About Bob? Overall, I don't necessarily think this is the best movie he's been in, because he's been in some real bangers, but it's one of my favorite characters of his, not only because it's so funny, but because he is just on screen for 90% of this movie, making it a real fantastic Bill Murray watch.
Why'd you need to kick Bob out of the house?
You think he's gone? He's not gone! That's the whole point! He's never gone!
Is this some radical new therapy?
They've also got my favorite movie of all time, Goodfellas. This one has just really held in there as my favorite. It may get dethroned one day, but for now, this is my favorite, and a big thing I like about this movie I want you to tune into if you decide to watch it on Tubi is the main 3 acts. In the beginning, everything's great, Henry Hill's becoming a gangster, and it's fun, and they are just having a blast being bad guys. In the middle, things start to take a turn, it gets more violent, they're burying bodies, and things are not really going swimmingly. Then by the third act, Henry Hill is coked out of his mind, he's paranoid, there's blues music, and the editing's faster, making it just a really wild ride. And that's not the only thing I love about it. I love everything about this movie and could literally talk about it for hours, but let's move on with some of the other movies on this list. They've also got The Edge, which I've talked about recently. It bounces around on streaming services, but if it's not on one of your paid ones now, this is well worth watching with ads. And even though I liked Cocaine Bear, it's 10 times better. I recently did a video about the most realistic or flawless movies on Netflix, and I mentioned Ron Howard's Apollo 13 as one of the more realistic movies ever made. It's not on Netflix, it's on Tubi, and it's free, and it's well worth watching with ads. I have rewatched this recently, and my goodness, does this feel authentic. If you don't know, they actually filmed all of the stuff in space in a zero-gravity plane. They built the shuttle set on the Vomit Comet plane, took it up, came down, could only shoot for about a minute, minute and a half per take, and created a really amazing experience that is really just unparalleled.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem.
The Siege is kind of a forgotten gem. This has got a huge cast. It's got Denzel Washington, Bruce Willis, Annette Bening, and martial law is declared in Manhattan in this movie. You get some espionage stuff, you get some terrorist elements, and for a movie where all of Manhattan is basically put under siege, it feels very realistic and authentic. This does not feel like Escape from New York. And the movie was fairly well reviewed back when it was released, but it came out just a couple of years before 9/11 and was definitely not the type of movie people wanted to watch after that. But here in 2023, this could make a really excellent watch, if not a little bit of a slow-paced, kind of dry one. One that would make a killer double feature with Judas and the Black Messiah is Dead Presidents, directed by the Hughes brothers. This was their follow-up to Menace to Society. They've done a handful of other movies since, movies like From Hell with Johnny Depp and The Book of Eli, but I still consider Dead Presidents to be their best film, kind of by far. Now, this movie does feature a very famous bank heist sequence. You've probably seen clips of it if you've never even seen the movie, or at least you've seen it parodied. But the movie itself is actually about a Vietnam vet trying to adjust to regular life after he comes back home. So if you've never seen it, you consider yourself a movie buff, or at least a budding one, then this is definitely one you have to watch. Another total gem that I have not seen in years, and honestly, I browse every single streaming service every single week trying to find the best movies to recommend to you. I don't know that I've seen The 13th Warrior available anywhere in the last several years. This stars Antonio Banderas and is loosely based on a book called Eaters of the Dead by Michael Crichton, and that book was loosely based on Beowulf. So you get this very removed story of Beowulf. A lot of elements are missing, it's fairly different, but if you're familiar with the story, then this is not only a really cool movie, but it's an interesting take on it that feels fairly realistic. But even if you don't tap into the Beowulf stuff, this is still a really excellent movie, and because I've not seen it available anywhere for a while, this is really one of my top recommendations off of this list. There's a lot more to talk about, but I'll say it again, this is only the recently added section on Tubi. There is lots more to check out. It is worth noting, though, that one of the other flaws of Tubi is they have too much to sift through. 90%, maybe a little less, is just absolute garbage, but as you can tell, there are lots of gems in there if you're willing to look. Movies like Hannah. This is a really excellent action flick. I believe Amazon Prime tried to make a series out of this, but they're actually really terrible at marketing, so I believe it flopped. The movie itself holds up, and I'm surprised it wasn't more popular. It's got really well choreographed action, a score done by the Chemical Brothers, and it's glued together really well, making it a top-tier recommendation for me. Now, it's worth noting that Hannah will be leaving soon, even though it was just recently added. Same goes for Kill Bill and a handful of others, which is why you want to click that subscribe button and the little bell icon. That way you get notified when these release, so you don't miss the movies before they're gone from their respective streaming service. Another personal favorite of mine is Stallone in Daylight. I am well aware that this is a cheesy movie. Not as cheesy as Tango and Cash, but it's got some dopier elements, but it's also really cool looking, and they did a lot of stuff in camera. Some of it's miniature and some of it's big sets, but this type of disaster movie is just something that's not really made anymore. Maybe they'll come back around. It's kind of a retelling of the Poseidon Adventure, but instead of a capsizing boat, it's inside a tunnel that's continuously flooding. In that respect, I would put Daylight way above that Poseidon Adventure remake they made about 10 years ago, way above it. One of Mark Wahlberg's first big movies, and still to this day, I think one of his best, Fear. If you've never seen this one, he plays this really possessive boyfriend to Reese Witherspoon. It is slow paced, there's sort of a romance thing that you have to kind of get through, but it goes into some dark directions and is kind of held up as a cult classic. They've also got Hellboy 2, not one of my favorites, but in terms of just visuals, it's got some of the best visuals Guillermo del Toro has ever put on screen. Not the best storytelling, but still, if you just want to watch some wild stuff, Hellboy 2 is an amazing looking movie. And then The Perfect Getaway is a really cool thriller with a good cast that I know flew way in under the radar.
They found 2 bodies on the beach. Authorities are searching for a man and a woman. Well, what do you think?
I mean, the big stars include Mia Jovanovic, Steve Zahn, Timothy Olyphant. You've even got a little role from Chris Hemsworth before he was really famous. This is about a group of people vacationing in Hawaii, going to some remote locations where they realize there are psychopaths stalking tourists. Now, this isn't a real grim gore fest, or I barely even classify this as a horror movie, but it is a fantastic rated R thriller that's got some twists and turns you won't see coming. Not a top tier movie, but if it's one you haven't seen and you like anything I've described about it, it's going to be an excellent new discovery for you. I could say the same thing about my next pick, The Signal, which is a really cool little indie sci-fi flick that has amazing cinematography for a lower budget sci-fi movie. So often, lower budget sci-fi movies look low budget. The Signal does not, and it explores some really interesting ideas. But as we get down to the bottom of the recently added section, you can see they've also got Uncle Buck. I'm not sure how many of you are going to watch it. That one's pretty played out, but still a really fun John Candy movie.
Take this quarter. Go downtown and have a rat gnaw that thing off your face.
And Carlito's Way, which is just a fantastic Al Pacino movie. A classic, but if it's been a while since you've seen it, or again, you consider yourself a movie buff, maybe a new one and you've never discovered that one, another top tier pick on this list. Should give you a good idea how many amazing movies are available on Tubi right now. But that is the list. The full list of all the movies discussed can be found in the top pinned comment, along with the link to every plate. Thanks again to them for sponsoring another video, but I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Tubi episode, and you will see me on the next one.